The mountain air whispered through the pines, carrying the scent of resin and wild herbs. Jacob stood on his cabin's porch, weathered hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee. His eyes, still sharp despite the crow's feet etching their corners, scanned the tree line. 50 years of life, most spent in the unforgiving vacuum of space, had taught him to always be alert. But here, in this secluded haven, alertness seemed almost quaint. The loudest sound was the occasional cry of an eagle, the most dangerous predator, perhaps a mountain lion that avoided humans anyway. It was a far cry from the plasma-scarred battlefields and treacherous alien worlds he'd known as a space marine. Jacob took a sip of coffee, savoring the bitter warmth. A flicker of movement caught his eye. Just a deer picking its way through the underbrush. He allowed himself a small smile. This was why he'd chosen this life, this quiet, this peace. As the sun dipped below the mountain peaks, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Jacob retreated inside. His cabin was sparse but comfortable. A few mementos from his service days adorned the walls. A plasma rifle, now collecting dust. A hollow image of his old squad, faces frozen in laughter before their final mission. He settled into his favorite armchair, an old leather thing that had seen better days. A battered paperback waited on the side table. Actual paper, a luxury in the age of data tablets. Jacob had just cracked it open when a sound shattered the evening calm. It wasn't loud, not really. But to ears trained in combat, it might as well have been a cannon blast. A high-pitched whine, growing rapidly louder. The sound of something entering atmosphere at high speed. Jacob was on his feet in an instant, muscle memory kicking in. He snatched up a pair of old-fashioned binoculars and rushed outside. The twilight sky was ablaze, a streak of fire carving through the darkening blue. Whatever it was coming down fast. And close. "Damn it," Jacob muttered. He'd chosen this place for its isolation. No neighbors for miles. No curious eyes. And now this. The object, clearly some kind of craft, disappeared behind a nearby ridge. Moments later, a dull thud reached Jacob's ears, followed by the crack of splintering trees. For a long moment, Jacob stood motionless on his porch. Every instinct honed over decades of combat screamed at him to investigate. But another part of him, the part that had sought solitude in these mountains, whispered to let it be. To return to his book and his quiet evening. In the end, curiosity, and perhaps a sense of duty not quite forgotten, won out. Jacob ducked back inside, emerging moments later with a sturdy backpack and a sleek sidearm that looked decidedly out of place in the rustic setting. The trek through the darkening forest was familiar to Jacob. He moved with the quiet confidence of a man who knew every root and stone of his domain. As he neared the ridge, the scent of ozone and scorched vegetation filled the air. Cresting the hill, Jacob's breath caught in his throat. The clearing below was a scene of devastation. Trees lay splintered and broken, and at the center of it all sat a craft unlike anything he'd ever seen. It was small, barely large enough for a couple of occupants. Its hull gleamed with an iridescent sheen that seemed to shift colors in the fading light. Definitely not human technology. Jacob approached cautiously, sidearm at the ready. As he drew closer, a panel on the craft's side slid open with a soft hiss. Jacob tensed, finger hovering near the trigger. What emerged from the craft, however, was the last thing he expected. Two figures stumbled out, clearly disoriented. They were humanoid, but unmistakably alien. Their skin was a vibrant blue that seemed to shimmer in the twilight. Both were female, at least as far as Jacob could tell, with lithe, athletic builds. One of the aliens, the taller of the two, regained her composure quickly. Her eyes, a startling silver, locked onto Jacob. There was no fear in her gaze, only a fierce determination. "You," she said, her voice carrying a musical lilt despite the clear note of command. "Are you the dominant species of this world?" Jacob blinked, momentarily taken aback. It had been a long time since he'd dealt with alien languages, but his neural translator seemed to be working fine. He lowered his weapon slowly. "I'm a human, if that's what you're asking," he replied cautiously. "And humans are the dominant species here. Yes." The alien woman nodded, seemingly satisfied. "I am Lyra, she said, then gestured to her companion, who was looking around with wide-eyed wonder. This is Vea. We seek temporary sanctuary on your world. Jacob's mind raced. Two alien women, crash landing practically in his backyard, asking for sanctuary. It was like the setup to one of those terrible holodramas he'd occasionally caught glimpses of in spaceports. Look, he said, holstering his weapon. I'm not exactly in a position to grant sanctuary. I'm just one man, living alone out here. Lyra's eyes narrowed. You are not part of your world's governing body? No, I'm retired. The word felt strange on Jacob's tongue. He'd never really used it before. The other alien, Vea, spoke up for the first time. Her voice was softer, filled with curiosity. Retired? What does this mean? Jacob sighed. It means I used to have a job, a duty, and now I don't. I chose to live apart from others. Vea's face lit up with understanding. Ah, like a hermit in the stories of old. Despite himself, Jacob felt a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Something like that, yeah. Lyra, however, looked concerned. If you are not part of the governing body, can you direct us to someone who is? Our mission is of great importance. Jacob tensed again. Mission? Look, I don't want any trouble. I left that life behind. Lyra's expression softened slightly. We mean no harm to your world or its people. We are explorers, seeking to understand other cultures. But we cannot return home for some time, and we need a safe place to conduct our studies. Jacob ran a hand through his graying hair, conflicted. Every instinct told him to send them on their way, to protect the solitude he'd worked so hard to achieve. But something in Lyra's determined gaze and Vea's wide-eyed curiosity gave him pause. Your craft, he said finally, can it be repaired? Lyra shook her head. Not without materials unavailable on your world. We will be able to send a signal for retrieval, but it will take time for it to reach our people. Jacob closed his eyes for a moment, already regretting what he was about to say. All right, you can stay with me for now, but only until we can figure out a better solution. The gratitude that bloomed on both aliens' faces was almost painful to see. Vea actually clapped her hands in delight. Thank you, hermit human, she exclaimed. We will be most unobtrusive guests. Jacob seriously doubted that, but he'd made his decision. Name's Jacob, he grunted. Come on, let's get you two inside before it gets too dark. We can figure out the rest in the morning. As they made their way back to the cabin, Jacob couldn't help but notice the way Lyra moved, silent and graceful, every step purposeful. She reminded him of the best soldiers he'd served with. Vea, by contrast, seemed to flit from one fascinating plant or rock to another, barely containing her excitement. Back at the cabin, Jacob ushered them inside, suddenly acutely aware of how Spartan his living space was. It's not much, he said gruffly, but it's home. Lyra nodded approvingly. It is defensible and well hidden, a good choice for one who values solitude. Vea, however, was already exploring, her silver eyes wide with wonder. She ran her fingers over the leather armchair, the wooden table, the paper pages of Jacob's discarded book. Such primitive material, she exclaimed, but her tone was one of fascination rather than disdain. It's all so tactile. Jacob raised an eyebrow. Primitive? I'll have you know that chair is a genuine antique. Lyra shot him a look that might have been amusement. I believe what Vea means is that your technology level is less advanced than what we are accustomed to. Right, Jacob muttered. Well, sorry we can't all have color-changing spaceships. To his surprise, Lyra actually laughed, a melodious sound that seemed to brighten the room. Your defensiveness is unnecessary, Jacob. We are guests in your home and on your world. It would be poor manners to disparage your way of life. Jacob felt himself relaxing slightly. Well, when you put it that way, let me show you around. It won't take long. He gave them a quick tour of the cabin's main room, kitchenette, and spare bedroom. You two can take the guest room, he said. I'll sleep out here. Vea, who had been trailing her fingers along every surface she passed, suddenly froze. She was staring at a door Jacob hadn't opened. What's in there? She asked, curiosity practically radiating from her. Jacob blinked. That's just the bathroom. Both aliens looked at him blankly. Bath? Room, Lyra repeated. the word clearly unfamiliar. Yeah, for cleaning up? Jacob suddenly felt very awkward. Don't tell me you don't have bathrooms where you come from. Vea shook her head, her long silvery hair shimmering with the movement. We have cleansing chambers on our world, but they are communal and use sonic waves. This seems different. Jacob sighed. He should have known it wouldn't be this easy. Right. Well, I suppose I'd better show you how it works, or we'll all be in for an unpleasant surprise later. He opened the door, revealing a simple but modern bathroom. Vea gasped in delight, immediately darting inside to examine everything. Lyra followed more sedately, but Jacob could see the keen interest in her eyes. This is the sink, Jacob explained, demonstrating the faucet. For washing hands and face. Vea mimicked his motions, her eyes widening as water flowed from the tap. It's cold, she exclaimed. It can be hot too, Jacob said, adjusting the temperature. This elicited another delighted gasp from Vea. And this, he continued, pulling back the shower curtain, is the shower. Both aliens stared at the shower head with a mixture of confusion and fascination. What is its purpose? Lyra asked. Jacob ran a hand through his hair, feeling more awkward by the second. It's for cleaning your whole body. You stand under it, and the water rinses you off. Vea's eyes lit up. Like standing in the rain. How delightful. Lyra, however, looked skeptical. And this is hygienic. Well, you use soap too, Jacob explained. Look, it's late, and this is probably a lot to take in. Why don't we all get some rest, and I can give you a more detailed rundown in the morning? Lyra nodded, ever practical. A wise suggestion. We are grateful for your hospitality, Jacob. As Jacob showed them to the guest room and bid them good night, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just become infinitely more complicated. He settled into his armchair, knowing sleep would be a long time coming. In the quiet of the night, he could hear the soft murmur of Lyra and Vea's voices from the guest room, punctuated occasionally by Vea's musical laughter. Despite his reservations, Jacob found himself smiling. It had been a long time since these walls had heard laughter. As he finally drifted off to sleep, Jacob's last conscious thought was that tomorrow was certainly going to be interesting. The first rays of dawn were just beginning to paint the sky when Jacob awoke, his body still attuned to the rhythms of military life, despite years of retirement. For a moment he lay still, listening. The cabin was quiet, but he could sense the presence of his unexpected guests, a subtle shift in the air perhaps, or just the knowledge that he was no longer alone. He rose quietly, years of training, allowing him to move without a sound. A quick glance at the guest room door showed it still closed. Good. It would give him time to prepare. Jacob went through his morning routine mechanically, his mind racing. What had he gotten himself into? Two alien women hiding out in his home, fascinated by the most mundane aspects of human life. It was like something out of a bad romance novel. He was halfway through his first cup of coffee when he heard it, a startled yelp, followed by the sound of running water and Vea's delighted laughter. Jacob closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and counted to 10. Then he strode to the bathroom door and knocked firmly. Everything all right in there? He called, trying to keep his voice neutral. The door flew open, revealing a very wet and extremely excited Vea. Water dripped from her blue skin and silvery hair, forming a puddle on the floor. Her eyes were wide with wonder. Jacob, this shower is amazing. It's like having a personal rainstorm. Behind her, Jacob could see Lyra, looking decidedly less amused. She was also wet, but seemed to be trying to maintain some dignity. I see you figured out how to turn it on, Jacob said dryly. Lyra stepped forward, her expression a mixture of embarrassment and determination. We apologize for the disturbance, Jacob. Vea's curiosity got the better of her. Jacob waved off the apology. No harm done. Though maybe next time, wait for me to show you how things work before you start pushing buttons. Vea nodded enthusiastically, sending droplets flying. Oh, yes, of course. But Jacob, you must tell us more about this shower. Why do humans stand in water to clean themselves? How does the water know to fall in such a precise pattern? And what is this delightful scented substance? She held up a bottle of shampoo, sniffing it appreciatively. Jacob pinched the bridge of his nose, feeling a headache coming on. It was going to be a long day. Right. How about you two dry off and get dressed, and then we'll have a proper talk about everything. As the aliens retreated to the guest room, Jacob couldn't help but notice the way the water made their skins shimmer, highlighting curves that were all too humanoid. He quickly pushed that thought aside. This was not the time for such observations. 20 minutes later, they were all seated at Jacob's small kitchen table. Lyra and Vea had changed back into their original attire, form-fitting suits that seemed to shift color slightly with their movements. Jacob had prepared a simple breakfast of toast and fruit, which Vea was examining with great interest. "So," Jacob began, taking a sip of his second coffee, "I think we need to establish some ground rules." Lyra nodded, her posture straight and attentive. "Of course, we are guests in your home. It is only right that we abide by your customs." "Right," Jacob continued. "First off, no touching anything you're not familiar with without asking first. I know everything must seem strange to you, but some things could be dangerous if mishandled." Vea looked chastened. "We understand. I am sorry for my impulsiveness with the shower." Jacob softened slightly. "It's all right. No harm done. Which brings me to the second point. We need to be careful about you being seen. This is a remote area, but hikers do come through occasionally. If word gets out about two blue-skinned women living with the local hermit, we'll have more attention than any of us want." Lyra's eyes narrowed slightly. "You fear your people would react badly to our presence?" Jacob sighed. "It's complicated. Humanity has had contact with alien species before, but it's still not common. And two aliens suddenly showing up on Earth without going through official channels? That would cause a lot of problems." "We understand," Lyra said solemnly. "We will do our best to remain undetected." "Good," Jacob nodded. "Now, about your mission. You said you're here to study Earth culture?" Vea's face lit up. "Oh yes, we are anthropologists from our world. We seek to understand how other species live, their customs, their beliefs. It's all so fascinating." Jacob couldn't help but smile at her enthusiasm. "Well, I'm not sure I'm the best example of typical Earth culture. I've been out of the loop for a while." Lyra leaned forward, her silver eyes intense. "But that is precisely why you are an ideal subject, Jacob. You have experienced both the wider universe and this isolated existence. Your perspective is unique." Jacob shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He wasn't used to being the center of attention, especially not from two attractive alien women. "Look, I left that life behind for a reason. I'm not sure I want to dig up old memories." Vea's face fell, her expression so crestfallen that Jacob immediately felt guilty. Lyra, however, maintained her composed demeanor. "We respect your privacy, Jacob," Lyra said softly. "We are not here to pry into painful pasts. We simply wish to observe and learn about daily life on Earth. Your routines, your habits, your interactions with your environment. These are all valuable data points for our research." Jacob sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "Fine. I suppose there's no harm in that. But remember, we need to keep a low profile. No wandering off, no contacting anyone else. Got it?" Both aliens nodded solemnly. Vea, however, couldn't contain her excitement for long. She picked up a piece of toast, examining it closely. "And we may ask questions about these fascinating objects and customs?" Despite himself, Jacob chuckled. "Yes, you can ask questions. Just maybe not all at once, okay?" The rest of the morning passed in a whirlwind of explanations. Jacob found himself describing the most mundane aspects of his life in detail he'd never considered before. The concept of toasting bread was particularly fascinating to Vea, while Lyra seemed more interested in the practical aspects of Jacob's self-sufficient lifestyle. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Jacob decided it was time for some fresh air. "I usually do a perimeter check in the mornings," he explained. "Make sure there are no unwelcome visitors or signs of trouble." Lyra's eyes lit up with interest. "A sensible precaution. May we accompany you on this patrol?" Jacob hesitated. On one hand, taking them outside increased the risk of discovery. On the other, keeping them cooped up in the cabin would likely drive all of them crazy before long. "All right," he conceded, "but stay close, and if I say hide, you hide. No questions asked." The aliens agreed readily, and soon they were making their way through the sun-dappled forest. Jacob moved with the quiet efficiency of a seasoned soldier, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. Lyra matched his pace easily, her movements almost predatory in their grace. Vea, however, could barely contain her wonder, constantly stopping to examine plants, rocks, or insects. "This flora is remarkable," Vea exclaimed, crouching to study a patch of wildflowers. "So vibrant, yet so delicate. Our world has nothing like this." Jacob paused, curiosity getting the better of him. "What is your world like?" Lyra's expression grew distant. "Harsh by your standards. Much of the surface is covered in vast mineral deserts. Life exists primarily in deep caverns and underground seas." "That sounds challenging," Jacob offered, trying to imagine such an alien landscape. Vea stood, brushing pollen from her hands. "It is beautiful in its own way," she said softly. "But this," she gestured to the forest around them, "this is like stepping into a dream." As they continued their patrol, Jacob found himself seeing his familiar surroundings through new eyes. The play of sunlight through the leaves, the chorus of birdsong, the rich scent of earth and growing things. All of it seemed heightened, more vibrant. They were nearing the end of their circuit when Jacob suddenly froze, holding up a hand for silence. Lyra tensed immediately, her body coiled like a spring. Vea, picking up on their alertness, went still. For a long moment, there was nothing but the whisper of wind through the trees. Then a twig snapped, somewhere off to their right. Jacob motioned for the aliens to take cover behind a large fallen log, then crouched low, peering through the underbrush. A figure emerged from between the trees, a hiker from the looks of it, consulting a map. Jacob's heart raced. He'd gotten careless, forgetting that this was a popular weekend for camping in the area. He glanced back at Lyra and Vea, who were watching him intently. He put a finger to his lips, then gestured for them to stay put. Silently, he rose and stepped out into the hiker's path. "Morning," Jacob called, keeping his voice casual. "You look a bit turned around." The hiker, a young man with a scraggly beard, jumped slightly. "Oh, yeah. I think I might have taken a wrong turn back there. I'm looking for Coyote Ridge Trail?" Jacob nodded, pointing off to the east. "You're not far off. Head that way for about half a mile, you'll see the trail markers." "Thanks, man," the hiker said, relief evident in his voice. "Didn't expect to run into anyone out here." Jacob forced a smile. "Just out for a morning walk. Be careful out there." As the hiker moved off in the direction Jacob had indicated, he let out a long, slow breath. That had been too close. He turned back to where Lyra and Vea were hidden, only to find Lyra standing right behind him, her expression unreadable. "That was well handled," she said quietly. "You did not lie, yet you misdirected him effectively." Jacob shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "Let's head back. I think that's enough excitement for one morning." As they made their way back to the cabin, Jacob's mind raced. The encounter with the hiker had driven home the precariousness of their situation. How long could he really hope to keep two alien women hidden? And what would happen when their people eventually came for them? Back at the cabin, Jacob busied himself with preparing lunch, grateful for the mundane task. Vea peppered him with questions about the various foods and cooking implements, while Lyra sat at the table, her gaze distant and thoughtful. As they ate, Jacob decided it was time to address the elephant in the room. "So," he began, setting down his fork, "how long do you two plan on staying here?" Lyra and Vea exchanged a glance. "We are not certain," Lyra admitted. "Our mission parameters were somewhat flexible." Jacob's eyes narrowed. "Meaning?" Vea fidgeted with her napkin. "Our people believe that the best way to understand a culture is to immerse oneself in it fully. We were instructed to remain until we felt we had gained a comprehensive understanding of Earth's ways." "And how long does that usually take?" Jacob pressed. Lyra met his gaze steadily. "It varies, sometimes weeks, sometimes years." Jacob nearly choked on his water. "Years? You can't be serious. There's no way we can keep this up for years." "We understand your concern," Lyra said, her voice soothing. "But consider the opportunity this presents. You have chosen a life of solitude, yet you have welcomed us into your home. Perhaps this is a chance for mutual enlightenment." Jacob stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I need some air," he muttered, striding out onto the porch. The mountain air was cool on his face, grounding him. Jacob took several deep breaths, trying to calm his racing thoughts. What had he gotten himself into? He'd left behind the chaos and complexity of his old life, seeking peace and simplicity. Now, it seemed the universe had other plans. He heard the cabin door open behind him but didn't turn around. Soft footsteps approached, and then Vea was standing beside him, her silver eyes reflecting the afternoon sunlight. "We have caused you distress," she said softly. "That was not our intent." Jacob sighed, his anger deflating. "It's not your fault. I'm not sure I'm cut out for this." Vea was quiet for a moment, her gaze on the distant mountains. "When we first arrived on your world, I was terrified," she admitted. "Everything was so strange, so overwhelming. But you showed us kindness and patience. You made us feel safe." She turned to face him, and Jacob was struck by the earnestness in her expression. "I believe there is much we can learn from each other, Jacob. If you are willing to try." Jacob looked at her, then back at the cabin where Lyra was undoubtedly listening. He thought about the quiet life he'd built here, and how in just one day, these two had brought more excitement and wonder into it than he'd experienced in years. "All right," he said finally. "We'll give it a try. But we're going to need some ground rules." Vea's face lit up with a smile so radiant it almost hurt to look at. "Thank you, Jacob. I promise. You won't regret this." The morning sun streamed through the cabin windows, casting a warm glow on the worn wooden floors. Jacob stood in the kitchen, his calloused hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee. He watched with a mixture of amusement and trepidation as Lyra and Vea examined every inch of his modest home. "Jacob," Vea called, her silvery voice tinged with excitement. "We've been discussing your cleansing ritual. The shower, as you call it. We'd very much like to experience it properly." Jacob nearly choked on his coffee. "Experience it? You mean, together?" Lyra appeared in the doorway, her piercing gaze fixed on Jacob. "Is that not customary? On our world, communal cleansing is the norm." "Well, Jacob stammered, feeling heat rise to his cheeks. "It's not exactly. Humans usually shower alone." Vea's face fell. "Oh, have we offended you?" Jacob sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. No, you haven't offended me. It's just different here." Lyra tilted her head, a gesture Jacob was beginning to recognize as curiosity. "Yet you seemed uncomfortable when we used it separately yesterday. Is there a correct protocol we're missing?" Jacob set down his mug, trying to gather his thoughts. How had he ended up playing cultural ambassador for something as mundane as showering? "Look, it's not that complicated. You just get in, turn on the water, soap up, rinse off. That's it." The aliens exchanged a glance that spoke volumes. "Perhaps," Lyra suggested, her tone carefully neutral, "it would be more efficient if you demonstrated the proper technique." Jacob's eyes widened. "Demonstrate? I don't think that's—" "Oh, yes!" Vea clapped her hands, her enthusiasm infectious. "A practical lesson would be most enlightening." Before Jacob could formulate a response, he found himself being ushered towards the bathroom by two eager aliens. He briefly considered making a break for it, fleeing into the surrounding forest. But the earnest curiosity in their eyes made him pause. They were his guests, after all, and he had agreed to help them understand Earth culture. "All right," he conceded with a sigh, "but we're going to set some ground rules first." 10 minutes later, Jacob stood awkwardly in his bathroom, wearing a pair of swim trunks he'd dug out of storage. Lyra and Vea, still clad in their form-fitting suits, watched him expectantly. "Okay," Jacob began, trying to keep his voice steady. "First things first, temperature control." He reached into the shower and turned the knob, adjusting it carefully. "You want it warm, but not too hot." Vea leaned in close, her silver eyes wide with fascination. "And this device knows the optimal temperature for human skin?" Jacob couldn't help but chuckle. "No, it's not that advanced. You have to adjust it yourself." He demonstrated how to test the water temperature, acutely aware of Lyra's intense gaze following his every move. When he was satisfied with the settings, he stepped back. "All right, who wants to go first?" Lyra and Vea exchanged another of their wordless glances. Then, to Jacob's shock, they both stepped into the shower fully clothed. "Whoa, wait!" Jacob exclaimed. "You're supposed to—" His words were cut off by twin gasps of surprise as the water hit them. Vea let out a delighted laugh, while Lyra's eyes widened in what could only be described as wonder. "It's so warm!" Vea exclaimed, tilting her face up into the spray. "Like standing in a gentle rainstorm." Lyra ran her hands through the water, watching it cascade off her blue skin. "Fascinating. The pressure is much greater than I expected." Jacob found himself smiling despite his embarrassment. Their childlike joy at such a simple thing was oddly touching. "You're, supposed to take your clothes off first," he explained belatedly. Lyra fixed him with that piercing gaze again. "Is that an invitation, Jacob?" He felt his face flush. "No, I mean, it's just, that's how humans do it." Vea, who had been twirling under the spray, paused. "But you're still clothed," she pointed out innocently. Jacob cleared his throat. "Well, yes, but that's because— Look, usually people shower alone, okay?" Lyra stepped closer to the shower curtain, water dripping from her now-soaked suit. "Yet you agreed to demonstrate. Are you uncomfortable, Jacob?" There was something in her tone, a hint of challenge perhaps, that made Jacob's pulse quicken. "I'm not uncomfortable," he said, more gruffly than he intended. "I'm just trying to respect your privacy." Vea laughed, the sound like tinkling bells. "Privacy? But Jacob, we invited you to join us." Before he could formulate a response, Lyra reached out and grabbed his arm, pulling him into the shower with surprising strength. Jacob stumbled, nearly losing his balance on the slick floor. He found himself sandwiched between the two aliens, warm water cascading over all of them. "There," Lyra said, a hint of smugness in her voice. "Now we can all learn together." Jacob was acutely aware of their bodies pressed against him, the way their wet suits clung to their curves. He took a deep breath, trying to focus on anything else. "Right," he managed, his voice hoarse. "So, next step is soap." He reached for the soap dispenser, but Vea beat him to it. She squeezed a large dollop onto her hand, then looked at it quizzically. "And this substance cleanses the skin?" "Yeah, you just—" Jacob trailed off as Vea began to rub the soap directly onto his chest. Her touch was gentle, curious, and it sent a jolt of electricity through him. "Like this?" she asked innocently. Jacob swallowed hard. That's the general idea. Yeah." Lyra watched this interaction with interest, then reached for the shampoo. "And this is for the hair, correct?" Before Jacob could answer, she had squeezed a generous amount onto his head and begun to massage it in. Her strong fingers worked through his hair, and despite himself, Jacob felt a groan of pleasure escape his lips. "You seem to be enjoying this ritual more now, Jacob," Lyra observed, a hint of amusement in her voice. Jacob opened his mouth to respond, but at that moment, Vea lost her footing on the slippery floor. She grabbed onto him for support, causing all three of them to stumble. They ended up in a tangled heap, laughing and spluttering under the spray of water. As Jacob helped them up, he couldn't help but notice the way the water made Lyra's suit shimmer, highlighting every curve. Vea's silver hair was plastered to her face, giving her an endearingly disheveled look. "Perhaps," Lyra said, her voice low and husky, "you could show us how humans typically enjoy this experience." Jacob met her gaze, seeing the challenge there, but also something else. Curiosity, yes, but also a growing warmth. He glanced at Vea, who was watching him with wide, expectant eyes. In that moment, Jacob made a decision. He reached out and adjusted the shower head, angling it so the spray hit them all evenly. Then hesitantly at first, but with growing confidence, he began to show them how to really enjoy a shower. He guided Vea's hands to her hair, showing her how to work the shampoo into a lather. He demonstrated for Lyra the best way to use a loofah, his hands skimming over her arms and back. As they rinsed off, he explained the simple pleasure of just standing under the warm spray, letting the water soothe tired muscles. By the time they stepped out of the shower, all three of them were breathless and laughing. Jacob handed them towels, trying not to stare as they dried off. "That was enlightening," Lyra said, her usual composure slightly ruffled. Vea nodded enthusiastically. "Oh, yes. I can see why humans enjoy this ritual so much. Jacob couldn't help but smile. Yeah, it's not bad, is it? As they made their way back to the living room, Jacob was struck by how comfortable he felt in their presence. The awkwardness of earlier had melted away, replaced by a warm camaraderie. So, he said, settling into his armchair, what other Earth customs are you curious about? Lyra and Vea exchanged a glance, their eyes sparkling with mischief. Well, Vea began, we've been wondering about human sleeping arrangements. Jacob groaned, but he couldn't keep the smile off his face. Life with these two was certainly going to be interesting. Over the next few days, Jacob found himself falling into a new routine. Mornings were spent answering endless questions about Earth culture, from the mundane, why do humans wear different clothes for sleeping, to the profound, what drives humans to explore the stars. Afternoons were often dedicated to what Lyra called practical demonstrations. This could mean anything from cooking lessons, which nearly resulted in a small fire when Vea got overly enthusiastic with the stove, to nature walks, where Jacob had to constantly remind them not to eat unfamiliar berries. It was during one of these walks that Jacob noticed a change in their dynamic. They had paused by a small stream, and Vea was crouched at the water's edge, fascinated by the tiny fish darting about. Your world is so full of life, she marveled, her voice soft with wonder. On our planet, such abundance is rare. Jacob found himself moving closer, drawn by the genuine awe in her voice. It is pretty special, he agreed. Sometimes I forget to appreciate it. Lyra, who had been scanning the tree line with her usual alertness, joined them. Perhaps that is why you chose this isolated existence, she observed. To reconnect with the natural world. Jacob considered this. Maybe. Or maybe I was just running away from my past. He hadn't meant to say that last part out loud, but something about their presence made him want to open up. Lyra's hand on his arm was surprisingly warm. We all have past we struggle with, Jacob, she said softly. It takes courage to face them. Vea stood, water droplets clinging to her blue skin like tiny jewels. And sometimes, she added with a smile, it takes unexpected encounters to help us see our lives in a new light. Jacob looked at them both, struck by the wisdom in their words. These aliens, so different from him in many ways, were beginning to feel like friends, or perhaps something more. The moment was broken by a distant rumble of thunder. Jacob glanced at the sky, noticing dark clouds gathering on the horizon. We should head back, he said. Looks like a storm's coming. As they made their way back to the cabin, the wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of rain. Vea seemed delighted by the changing weather, while Lyra kept a wary eye on the darkening sky. They had just reached the porch when the first fat droplets began to fall. Jacob ushered them inside, closing the door against the growing storm. Well, he said, running a hand through his damp hair, I guess we're in for the evening. Lyra moved to the window, watching the rain lash against the glass. Your weather is as volatile as your emotions, she observed. Jacob chuckled. You don't know the half of it. Wait till you see snow. Vea's eyes lit up. Snow? Is that another form of water? As Jacob launched into an explanation of Earth's various precipitation types, he couldn't help but notice how close Lyra was standing. Her body radiated a subtle heat, and he found himself acutely aware of every small movement she made. The storm outside intensified, wind howling around the cabin's eaves. A particularly loud crack of thunder made Vea jump, instinctively grabbing Jacob's arm. It's okay, he reassured her, patting her hand. We're safe in here. Lyra moved closer, her shoulder brushing against his. Perhaps, she suggested, her voice low, this would be a good time for you to tell us more about your past, Jacob, about the life you left behind. Jacob tensed for a moment, old instincts warning him to deflect, to change the subject. But as he looked at their open, curious faces, he felt something inside him shift. All right, he said softly, but it's not a happy story. As the storm raged outside, Jacob began to speak. He told them of his years as a space marine, of the wonders and horrors he'd seen among the stars. He spoke of comrades lost, of battles won and lost, of the toll it had taken on his soul. Lyra and Vea listened intently, their expressions a mix of fascination and empathy. They asked questions not just about the events he described, but about how he had felt, what he had learned. As the night wore on and the storm began to subside, Jacob found himself feeling lighter than he had in years. Sharing his story, hearing their perspectives, it was like lancing an old wound. Painful, yes, but also cleansing. When he finally fell silent, Vea reached out and took his hand. "Thank you for sharing this with us, Jacob," she said softly. Lyra nodded, her usually stoic expression softened with understanding. "Your experiences have shaped you, but they do not define you. You are more than your past." Jacob felt a lump form in his throat. "I thank you, both of you. I haven't talked about this stuff in a long time." As they sat there in the quiet aftermath of the storm, Jacob realized something had changed. The boundaries between them, already blurred, had shifted again. These two alien women who had crashed into his life so unexpectedly were becoming something he never thought he'd have again. They were becoming family. The realization both thrilled and terrified him. As he looked at Lyra's strong, composed features and Vea's bright, curious eyes, Jacob knew that his life would never be the same. And maybe, just maybe, that wasn't such a bad thing after all. The soft glow of the fireplace cast dancing shadows across the cabin's worn wooden floors. Jacob sat on the threadbare couch, a steaming mug of coffee warming his hands. Across from him, Lyra and Vea perched on mismatched armchairs, their blue skin shimmering in the flickering light. A comfortable silence had fallen over them, the kind that only comes after sharing deep truths. Jacob's throat felt raw from talking, from dredging up memories he'd long since buried. But there was also a lightness in his chest, as if speaking his past aloud had somehow lessened its weight. Vea broke the silence first, her silver eyes reflecting the firelight. "Jacob," she began, her musical voice soft, "I believe I'm beginning to understand why humans value privacy so much. These emotions, they're quite overwhelming." Jacob nodded, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "Yeah, they can be. That's why I came out here, I guess, to get away from it all." Lyra leaned forward, her usual composed demeanor slightly ruffled. "But isolation comes with its own price, does it not? We've observed that humans are social creatures. Surely this solitude has been difficult." The words hit Jacob like a physical blow. He'd spent so long convincing himself that he was better off alone, that he didn't need anyone. But now, sitting here with these two extraordinary beings, he felt the full weight of his loneliness crash down upon him. "It has," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I wanted to be alone, needed to be. But now—" He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Vea reached out, her slender fingers brushing against his arm. The touch sent a jolt of electricity through him. "Now you're not alone," she said simply. Jacob met her gaze, saw the sincerity there, and felt something inside him crack open. He turned to Lyra, expecting to see her usual stoic expression. Instead, he found a vulnerability in her eyes that mirrored his own. "This wasn't part of our mission parameters," Lyra said, a hint of frustration in her voice. "We came to study Earth culture, to observe, not to feel." "Feel what?" Jacob asked, his heart pounding. Lyra stood abruptly, pacing in front of the fireplace. "Attachment, connection. These human emotions are unsettling. On our world, we value logic, reason, but here, with you—" She stopped, facing Jacob, her silver eyes intense. "Everything is different." Vea nodded eagerly. "Oh yes, I've always been fascinated by humans, but I never expected to experience such intimacy," Jacob supplied, the word hanging heavy in the air between them. A charged silence fell over the room. Jacob felt as if he were standing on the edge of a precipice, teetering between the safety of his solitude and the thrilling unknown that Lyra and Vea represented. "I'm scared," Vea admitted suddenly, her voice small. "These feelings, they're so new, so intense. What if they're not real? What if it's just the novelty of this world? Of you, Jacob?" Lyra moved to Vea's side, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "We can't know for certain," she said, her tone gentler than Jacob had ever heard it. Our mission was meant to be temporary. We have a duty to return, to share our findings. Jacob felt a pang in his chest at the thought of them leaving. It was ridiculous, he knew. They'd only been here a short time, but somehow these alien women had burrowed their way into his heart, filling a void he hadn't even realized was there. You could stay, he found himself saying, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. I mean, if you wanted to. There's still so much to learn about Earth, right? Lyra and Vea exchanged a look, a silent communication passing between them. Then Lyra turned to Jacob, her expression softening. Jacob, she began, we've shared so much in our time here. You've opened your home to us, taught us about your world. But there's an entire galaxy out there, filled with wonders you can't imagine. Vea's eyes lit up. Oh yes, Jacob, the things we could show you. Nebulae that sparkle like diamonds, planets with rings of fire, civilizations that would boggle your mind. Jacob blinked, trying to process what they were saying. Are you asking me to come with you? Lyra nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Our ship can be repaired. We could leave this isolated existence behind, explore the stars together. The offer hung in the air, tantalizing and terrifying. Jacob's mind raced. Leave Earth? Abandon the quiet life he'd built here? But as he looked at Lyra and Vea, saw the hope and excitement in their eyes, he felt a stirring in his chest. A feeling he hadn't experienced in years. Adventure. I don't know what to say, he stammered. Vea moved closer, taking his hand in hers. Say yes, Jacob. Come with us. Let us show you the wonders of the universe. Lyra's hand came to rest on his shoulder, her touch warm and reassuring. You've been alone for so long. Perhaps it's time for a new chapter. Jacob closed his eyes, overwhelmed by the emotions coursing through him. Fear, excitement, hope, desire. They swirled together in a dizzying cocktail. When he opened his eyes again, he found Lyra and Vea watching him expectantly. Can I have some time to think about it? He asked. They nodded, understanding in their eyes. Lyra squeezed his shoulder gently. Of course, this is not a decision to be made lightly. As the fire crackled and popped, casting its warm glow over the room, Jacob felt as if he were standing at a crossroads. Behind him lay the safety and familiarity of his solitary life. Ahead, an unknown future filled with possibilities he could scarcely imagine. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Lyra and Vea spent much of their time repairing their ship, while Jacob found himself torn between the comfort of his routine and the excitement of what might be. He took long walks in the forest trying to clear his head, to weigh the pros and cons of leaving everything behind. But every time he thought he'd made up his mind to stay, he'd catch a glimpse of Lyra's determined focus as she worked on the ship, or hear Vea's delighted laugh as she discovered some new Earth oddity, and his resolve would crumble. On the evening before their planned departure, Jacob found himself standing on his porch, watching the sun dip below the mountain peaks. The sky was ablaze with color, as if Earth itself were putting on a final show to convince him to stay. He heard soft footsteps behind him and turned to find Lyra approaching. She came to stand beside him, her eyes on the horizon. It's beautiful, she said softly. Your world has a raw beauty that's quite captivating. Jacob nodded, a lump forming in his throat. Yeah, it does. I'm going to miss it. Lyra turned to him, surprise evident in her expression. Then you've decided to come with us? Jacob met her gaze, saw the hope there, and felt his heart skip a beat. I think I have, if the offer still stands. A smile spread across Lyra's face, transforming her usually stoic features. Without warning, she leaned in and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was brief but electric, sending shockwaves through Jacob's entire body. When she pulled back, her silver eyes were shining. The offer definitely still stands, she said, a hint of playfulness in her tone. Before Jacob could respond, a squeal of delight came from behind them. They turned to see Vea bouncing on her toes, clapping her hands excitedly. Oh, Jacob! You're coming with us? Really? She launched herself at him, wrapping him in a tight hug. This is wonderful. We have so much to show you. Jacob laughed, the sound rusty from disuse but genuine. He wrapped one arm around Vea and reached out to pull Lyra into the embrace as well. For a moment they stood there on the porch, tangled together, the setting sun painting them in shades of gold and pink. As they broke apart, Jacob felt a sense of peace settle over him. The decision that had seemed so daunting now felt right, as if all the pieces of his life were finally falling into place. The next morning dawned clear and crisp, a perfect autumn day. Jacob stood at the threshold of his cabin, a small bag of personal items slung over his shoulder. He took one last look around, committing every detail to memory. Outside, Lyra and Vea waited by their ship, which now gleamed as if brand new. Vea was practically vibrating with excitement, while Lyra maintained her usual composure, though Jacob could see the anticipation in her eyes. As Jacob stepped out of the cabin, closing the door behind him for the last time, he felt a momentary pang of doubt. Was he really doing this? Leaving behind everything he knew for an uncertain future among the stars? But then Vea called out to him, her voice filled with joy, and Lyra extended her hand in invitation. Jacob took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and strode towards them. As he reached the ship, Lyra and Vea each took one of his hands. Together, they turned to face the vast expanse of sky above them. "Ready for an adventure, Jacob?" Lyra asked, a rare smile playing at her lips. Jacob squeezed their hands, feeling the warmth of their skin against his. He thought of all the lonely years he'd spent in this cabin, hiding from his past and from the world, and he thought of the future that now stretched out before him, filled with possibilities he could scarcely imagine. "You know what?" he said, a grin spreading across his face. "I think I am." With that, they boarded the ship, the door sealing behind them with a soft hiss. Jacob settled into a seat between Lyra and Vea, his heart racing with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. As the engines hummed to life and the ship began to rise, Jacob caught one last glimpse of his cabin through the viewport. It grew smaller and smaller until it was just a speck among the trees, and then it was gone. But Jacob didn't feel loss. Instead, he felt a sense of liberation, of new beginnings. He turned to Lyra and Vea, saw the excitement and affection in their eyes, and knew that wherever this journey took them, he was exactly where he was meant to be. The ship broke through Earth's atmosphere, the blue of the sky giving way to the vast blackness of space. And as the stars spread out before them, infinite and inviting, Jacob realized that his greatest adventure was just beginning. He may have started this journey as a solitary hermit, but he was ending it with two extraordinary companions by his side. And really, wasn't that the greatest discovery of all? As the ship accelerated into the unknown, Jacob felt a laugh bubble up from deep inside him. It was a sound of pure joy, of freedom, of endless possibilities. Lyra and Vea joined in, their laughter mingling with his, filling the ship with the music of new beginnings. And so, with the earth shrinking behind them and the universe stretching out before them, Jacob, Lyra, and Vea set off on their grand adventure. Where it would take them, none of them knew. But one thing was certain: whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The story of the hermit and his alien visitors had come to an end. But their journey, that was just getting started. Dear listeners, as we come to the end of this captivating tale of Jacob, Lyra, and Vea, I hope you've enjoyed this journey as much as I've enjoyed sharing it with you. This story of an isolated hermit finding unexpected connection with two alien visitors has taken us from the quiet solitude of Earth's mountains to the vast, unexplored reaches of space. We've witnessed the blossoming of unlikely relationships, the breaking down of cultural barriers, and the power of connection to heal old wounds. Jacob's transformation from a reclusive ex-space marine to an adventurous explorer once again reminds us that it's never too late for new beginnings. This tale has touched on themes of loneliness, curiosity, cultural exchange, and the universal desire for companionship. It's shown us that sometimes the most profound connections can come from the most unexpected places, or even planets. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Did you enjoy this story? What parts resonated with you the most? Were you surprised by Jacob's decision to leave Earth behind? How do you think their adventure might continue? Perhaps this story has inspired you to consider your own life. Are there any comfort zones you've been hesitant to leave? Any unexpected connections you've made that have changed your perspective? Please share your thoughts and feelings about the story. Your feedback is invaluable and helps shape future narratives. Remember, every story is a conversation between the storyteller and the audience, and your voice is an essential part of that dialogue. Thank you for joining me on this interstellar journey. Until our next adventure among the stars, keep your hearts open to the unexpected and your eyes on the horizon. Who knows what wonders or who might be waiting just beyond the next cosmic corner?